prettiest cornflowers, and as clear as the purest glass. But it's very deep out there, so deep that even the longest anchor line can't touch bottom. You would have to pile up countless church steeples, one on top of the other, to get from the bottom of the sea all the way up to the surface. The sea people live down there. Now, you mustn't think for a moment that there is nothing but bare white sand down there. Oh no, the most wondrous trees and plants grow at the bottom of the sea, with stalks and leaves so supple that they stir with life at the slightest ripple in the water. The fish everywhere, large and small, dart between the branches, just the way birds fly through the trees up here. At the very deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a wise lady, but also very proud of her noble birth. And that's why she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while everyone else of high rank had to settle for 6. In every other way she deserved great praise, for she was deeply devoted to her granddaughters, the little sea princesses. They were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the fairest of them all. Her skin was as clear and soft as a rose petal. Her eyes were as blue as the deepest sea. But like all the others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fishtail. When you turn 15, Grandmother told them, you'll be allowed to swim up to the surface of the sea to sit on the rocks in the moonlight and watch the tall ships that pass by. You will also have the chance to see both forests and towns. In the coming year, one of the sisters was going to turn 15, but the others, well, they were each born a year apart, and the youngest of them had to wait 5 whole years before she could venture up from the depths to see how things look up here. But each promised to tell the others what she had seen and what she had liked the most on that first visit. Their grandmother had not told them nearly enough, and there was so much that they still wanted to know. No one longed to go up more than the youngest sister, the one who was so silent and thoughtful, and who also had the longest wait. Many a night she would stand at the open window and gaze up through the dark blue waters, where the fish were fluttering their fins and tails. She could see the moon and the stars, even though their light shone rather pale. Through the water they looked much bigger than they do to our eyes. If a black cloud passed beneath the stars, she knew that it was either a whale swimming overhead or a ship filled with many passengers. The people on board never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was waiting below, stretching her white arms up toward the keel of the ship. She would have cried, but mermaids cannot shed tears, and so they suffer even more than we do. "Oh, if only I were 15 years old," she would say. "I know that I would come to love the world up there and all the people who live in it." Finally, she turned 15. "Well now, soon we'll have you off our hands," said the old Dowager Queen, her grandmother. "Farewell," she said, as she rose up through the water as swiftly and brightly as a bubble moves up to the surface. The sun had just set when her head rose up through the waves, but the clouds were still gleaming like roses and gold. Up in the pale pink sky the evening star was shining bright and clear. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea was perfectly calm. A tall 3-masted ship was drifting in the water, with only one sail hoisted because there was not so much as a breeze. The sailors could be seen taking it easy on the rigging and in the masts. There was music and singing on board, and when it grew dark, hundreds of colored lanterns were lit. They made it look like the flags of all nations were fluttering in the wind. The little mermaid swam right up to the porthole of the cabin, and every time a wave lifted her, she could see a throng of elegantly dressed people through the clear glass. Among them was a young prince, the handsomest person there, with big dark eyes. He could not have been more than 16. It was his birthday, and that's why the festivities were taking place. How handsome the young prince looked! He shook hands with everyone, laughing and smiling as music filled the lovely night air. It was growing late, but the little mermaid could not tear herself away from the ship or from the handsome prince. The colored lanterns had long been extinguished. The rockets were no longer being fired into the air, and the cannon volleys had stopped. Now you could hear the sea churning and groaning deep down below. Still, the mermaid stayed on the surface, bobbing up and down so that she could look into the cabin. The ship began gathering speed as one sail after another caught the wind. The waves rose higher. Heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning flashed in the distance. A dreadful storm was brewing, and so the crew took in the sails while the great ship rocked and scudded through the raging sea. The waves rose higher and higher until they were like huge black mountains threatening to bring down the mast. The ship dove like a swan between the waves and then rose again on their lofty, foaming crests. The Little Mermaid thought it must be fun to sail so fast, but the crew didn't think so. The vessel groaned and creaked. The stout planks burst under the heavy pounding of the sea against the ship, and the mast snapped in two as if it were a reed. The ship rolled onto its side as water came rushing into the hold. The Little Mermaid suddenly realized that the ship was in real danger. She herself had to watch out for the beams and bits of wreckage drifting in the water. For an instant it was so dark that she couldn't see a thing, but then a flash of lightning lit everything up so that she could make out everyone on board. Now it was every man for himself. She was searching for the young prince, and just as the ship broke apart, she saw him disappear into the depths of the sea. At first she was overjoyed, for she believed that he would now live in her part of the world. But then she remembered that human beings could not survive underwater, and that only as a dead man could he come down to her father's palace. No, he mustn't die! And so she darted in among the drifting beams and planks, oblivious to the danger of being crushed. She dove deep down and came right back up again among the waves, and at last she found the young prince, who barely had the strength to keep afloat in the stormy waters. His limbs were failing him. His beautiful eyes were shut, and he would surely have drowned if the Little Mermaid had not come to his rescue. She held his head above water and let the waves carry the two of them along. By morning the storm had died down, and there was not a trace of the ship left. The sun, red and glowing, rose up out of the water and seemed to bring color back into the prince's cheeks. But his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his fine high brow and smoothed back his wet hair. She thought that he looked just like the marble statue in her little garden. She kissed him again and made a wish that he might live. Soon the mermaid saw land before her, lofty blue mountains topped with glittering white snow that made them look like nestling swans. Near the coast were lovely green forests, and close by was some kind of building, whether church or cloister she could not say. Lemon and orange trees were growing in the garden, and you could see tall palm trees by the gate. The sea formed a small bay at this point, and the water in it was quite fine, though very deep all the way up to the dunes, where white sand had washed ashore. The mermaid swam over there with the handsome prince, laid him down in the warm sunshine, and made a pillow for his head in the sand. Bells began ringing in the large white building, and a group of young girls came walking through the garden. The Little Mermaid swam further out from the shore, hiding behind some large boulders that rose out of the water. She covered her hair and chest with sea foam so that no one could see her. Then she watched to see who had come to help the poor prince. It was not long before a young girl came by. She had a frightened look on her face, but only for a moment, and she quickly ran away to get help. The mermaid watched as the prince came back to life and began to smile at everyone around him. But there was no smile for her, because of course, he had no idea that she had rescued him. After he was taken into the large building, she was overcome with sorrow and dove back into the water to return to her father's palace. The Little Mermaid had always been silent and thoughtful, but now she was even more so. Her sisters asked what she had seen during her first visit above, but she did not say a word. On many nights, when the fishermen were out at sea with their torches, she heard them praising the young prince, and that made her all the more happy about saving his life on the day he was drifting half dead on the waves. And she remembered how she had cradled his head on her chest and how lovingly she had kissed him. But he knew nothing about any of this and never even dreamed she existed. The Little Mermaid grew more and more fond of human beings and longed deeply for their company. Their world seemed far vaster than her own. They could fly across the ocean in ships and climb the steep mountains high above the clouds. And the lands they possessed, their woods and their fields, stretched far beyond where she could see. There was so much she would have liked to know, and her sisters weren't able to answer all her questions. And so she went to visit her old grandmother, who knew all about the world above, which she quite rightly called the lands above the sea. "If human beings don't drown," asked the little mermaid, "can they go on living forever? Don't they die as we do down here in the sea?" "Of course they do," the old woman replied. "They too must die, and their lifetime is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live for 300 years, but when we cease to exist, we turn into foam on the sea. We don't even have a grave down here among our loved ones. We lack an immortal soul, and so we shall never have another life. We're like the green rushes. Once they've been cut, they stop growing. But human beings have a soul that lives on forever, even after their bodies have turned to dust. It rises up through the pure air until it reaches the shining stars. Just as we rise up from the sea to behold the lands of humans, they rise up to beautiful, unknown regions that we shall never see." "Why weren't we given an immortal soul?" the little mermaid asked mournfully. "I would give all 300 years of my life in return for becoming a human for just one day and having a share in that heavenly world." "You mustn't waste your time worrying about these things," the grandmother told her. "We're really much happier and also better off than the human beings who live up there." "So then I'm doomed to die and to drift like foam on the sea, never to hear the music of the waves or see the lovely flowers in the red sun? Is there nothing I can do to gain an immortal soul?" "No," said the old woman. "Only if a human loved you so much that you meant more to him than his father and mother. If he were to love you with all his heart and soul, and had the priest place his right hand in yours with the promise of remaining faithful and true here in all eternity, then his soul would glide into your body, and you too would share in human happiness. He would give you a soul and still keep his own. But that will never happen. Your fishtail, which we find so beautiful, looks hideous to people on earth. They don't know any better. To be beautiful up there, you have to have those two clumsy pillars that they call legs." The little mermaid sighed and looked mournfully at her fishtail. "I would risk anything to win the prince and to gain an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing away in Father's castle, I'll go visit the sea witch. I've always been terrified of her, but maybe she can give me some advice and help me out." The little mermaid left her garden and set out for the place where the sea witch lived, on the far side of the roaring maelstroms. She finally reached a great slimy clearing in the woods where big, fat water snakes were romping in the mire and showing off their hideous, whitish-yellow bellies. In the middle of the clearing stood a house, built with the bones of shipwrecked human folk. There sat the sea witch, letting a toad feed from her mouth exactly the way you can feed a canary with a lump of sugar. She called the hideous water snakes her little chickadees and let them cavort all over her big spongy chest. "I know exactly what you want," the sea witch said. "How stupid of you! But I'm going to grant your wish, and it will bring you misfortune, my lovely princess. You're hoping to get rid of that fishtail and replace it with two stumps to walk on it like a human being. You're sure that the young prince will then fall in love with you, and then you can win him along with an immortal soul." And with that, the witch let out a loud, repulsive laugh, that the toad and the water snakes tumbled to the ground and went sprawling. "You've come here just in time," said the witch. "Tomorrow, once the sun is up, I wouldn't be able to help you for another year. I shall prepare a potion for you. You will have to swim to land with it before sunrise, sit down on the shore, and swallow it. Your tail will then split in two and shrink into what human beings call pretty legs. But it will hurt. It will feel like a sharp sword passing through you. Everyone who sees you will say that you are the loveliest human child they have ever encountered. You will keep your graceful movements. No dancer will ever glide so lightly. But every step you take will make you feel as if you were treading on a sharp knife, enough to make your feet bleed. If you are willing to endure all that, I think I can help you." "Yes," said the little mermaid, but her voice trembled, and she turned her thoughts to the prince and the prize of an immortal soul. "Think about it carefully," said the witch. "Once you take on the form of a human, you can never again be a mermaid. You'll never be able to swim back through the water to your sisters or to your father's palace. The only way you can acquire an immortal soul is to win the prince's love and make him willing to forget his father and mother for your sake. He must cling to you always in his thoughts and let the priest join your hands to become man and wife. If the prince marries someone else, the morning after the wedding your heart will break and you will become foam on the waves." "I'm ready," said the little mermaid, and she turned pale as death. "But first you will have to pay me," said the witch, "and it's not a small thing that I'm demanding. You have a voice more beautiful than anyone else's down here at the bottom of the sea. You may be planning to charm the prince with it, but you are going to have to give it to me. I want the dearest thing you possess in exchange for my precious potion. You see, I have to add my own blood to make sure that the drink will be as sharp as a double-edged sword." "But if you take my voice away," said the little mermaid, "what will I have left?" "Your lovely figure," said the witch, "your graceful movements, and your expressive eyes. With all that, you can easily enchant a human heart." "Well, where's your courage? Stick out your little tongue and let me cut it off in payment. Then you shall have your powerful potion." "So be it," said the little mermaid, and the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to brew the magic potion. "Cleanliness above everything else," she said, as she scoured the cauldron with the water snakes, which she had tied into a large knot. Then she made a cut in her chest and let her black blood ooze out. The steam from the cauldron created strange shapes, terrifying to behold. The witch kept tossing fresh things into the cauldron, and when the brew began to boil, it sounded like a crocodile weeping. At last the magic potion was ready, and it looked just like clear water. "There you go," said the witch as she cut out the mermaid's tongue. Now she was mute and could neither speak nor sing. The sun had not yet risen when she caught sight of the prince's palace and made her way up to the beautiful marble steps. The moon was shining clear and bright. The little mermaid drank the bitter, fiery potion, and it felt to her as if a double-edged sword was passing through her delicate body. She fainted and fell down as if dead. When the sun came shining across the sea, it woke her up. She could feel a sharp pain, but right there in front of her stood the handsome young prince. He stared at her so intently with his coal-black eyes that she cast down her own and saw that her fishtail was gone. She had as charming a pair of white legs as any young girl could want. But she was also quite naked, and so she wrapped herself in her long flowing hair. The prince asked who she was and how she had found her way there, and she could only gaze back at him tenderly and sadly with her deep blue eyes, for of course she could not speak. Then he took her by the hand and escorted her into the palace. Every step she took, as the witch had predicted, made her feel as if she were treading on sharp knives and piercing needles, but she willingly endured it. Hand in hand with the prince, she moved as lightly as a bubble. He and everyone else marveled at the beauty of her graceful movements. She was given costly dresses of silk and muslin after she arrived. She was the most beautiful creature in the palace, but she was mute and could not speak or sing. With each passing day, the prince grew fonder of the little mermaid. He loved her as one loves a dear, sweet child, and it never even occurred to him to make her his queen. And yet she had to become his wife, or else she would never receive an immortal soul. On his wedding morning, she would dissolve into foam on the sea. "Do you care for me more than anyone else?" the little mermaid's eyes seemed to ask when he took her in his arms and kissed her lovely brow. "Yes, you are more precious to me than anyone else," said the prince, "for you have the kindest heart of anyone I know, and you are more devoted to me than anyone else. You remind me of a young girl I once met, but shall probably never see again. I was in a shipwreck, and the waves cast ashore near a holy temple, where several young girls were performing their duties. The youngest of them found me on the beach and saved my life. I saw her just twice. She is the only one in the world whom I could ever love. But you look so much like her that you have almost driven her image out of my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and my good fortune has sent you to me. We will never part." Little does he know that it was I who saved his life, thought the little mermaid. I carried him across the sea to the temple in the woods, and I waited in the foam for someone to come and help. I saw the beautiful girl that he loves better than he loves me. And the mermaid sighed deeply, for she did not know how to shed tears. He says the girl belongs to the holy temple, and that she will therefore never return to the world. They will never meet again. I will stay by his side and can see him every day. I will take care of him and love him and devote my life to him. Not long after that, there was talk that the prince was going to marry, and that his wife would be the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king. And that's why he was riding out on a splendid ship. The next morning, the ship sailed into the harbor of the neighboring king's magnificent capital. All the church bells were ringing, and trumpeters blew a fanfare from the towers. Soldiers saluted with flying colors and flashing bayonets. Every day brought a new festival. Balls and banquets followed one another, but the princess had not yet appeared. It was reported that she had been raised and educated in a holy temple, where she was learning all the royal virtues. At last she appeared. The little mermaid was eager for a glimpse of her beauty, and she had to admit she had never seen a more enchanting person. Her delicate skin glowed with health, and her warm blue eyes shone with deep sincerity from behind her long dark lashes. "It's you," said the prince. "You're the one who rescued me when I was lying half dead on the beach." And he reached out and drew his blushing bride toward him. "Oh, I'm really overjoyed," he said to the little mermaid. "The best thing imaginable, more than I ever dared hope for, has been given to me. My happiness is sure to give you pleasure, for you are fonder of me than anyone else." The little mermaid kissed his hand, and she could feel her heart breaking. The day of the wedding would mean her death, and she would turn into foam on the ocean waves. The sails swelled in the breeze, and the ship glided lightly and smoothly across the clear seas. The little mermaid could not help but think of that first time she had come up from the sea and gazed on just such a scene of splendor and joy. And now, as she joined in the dance, swerving and swooping as lightly as a swallow does to avoid pursuit, cries of admiration greeted her from all sides. Never before had she danced so elegantly. It was as if sharp knives were cutting into her delicate feet, but she didn't notice, for the pain in her heart was far keener. She knew that this was the last night she would ever see the prince, the man for whom she had forsaken her family and her home, given up her beautiful voice, and suffered hours of agony without his suspecting a thing. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air that he did, or gaze into the deep sea and up at the starry sky. An eternal night without thoughts or dreams awaited her, since she did not have a soul and would never win one. All was joy and merriment on board until long past midnight. She laughed and danced with the others, although the thought of death was in her heart. The prince kissed his lovely bride while she played with his dark hair, and arm in arm they retired to the magnificent tent. The ship was now hushed and quiet. Only the helmsman was standing there at his wheel. The little mermaid was leaning on the railing with her white arms and looking east for a sign of the rosy dawn. She knew that the first ray of sunlight would mean her death. Suddenly, she saw her sisters rising up from the sea. They were as pale as she, but their beautiful long hair was no longer blowing in the wind. It had been cut off. "We gave our hair to the witch," they said, "so that she would help save you from death that awaits you tonight. She gave us a knife. Take a look. See how sharp it is? Before sunrise, you must plunge it into the prince's heart. Then, when his warm blood splatters on your feet, they will grow back together to form a fishtail, and you will be a mermaid again. You can come back down to us in the water and live out your 300 years before being changed into dead, salty sea foam. Hurry up! One of you will die before the sea rises. Our old grandmother has been so grief-stricken that her white hair started falling out, just the way ours fell to the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back to us. Hurry, look at the red streaks in the sky. In a few minutes the sun will rise, and then you will die." And with a strange, deep sigh, they sank back beneath the waves. The little mermaid drew back the purple curtain of the tent, and she saw the lovely bride sleeping with her head on the prince's chest. She bent down and kissed his handsome brow, then looked at the sky where the rosy dawn was growing brighter and brighter. She gazed at the sharp knife in her hand and fixed her eyes again on the prince, who was whispering the name of his bride in his dreams. She was the only one in his thoughts. The little mermaid's hand began to tremble as she took the knife. Then she flung it out far over the waves. The water turned red where it fell, and it looked as though blood was oozing up drop by drop through the water. With one last glance at the prince from eyes half dimmed, she threw herself off the ship into the sea and felt her body dissolve into foam. And now the sun came rising up from the sea. Its warm and gentle rays fell on the deadly cold sea foam. But the little mermaid did not feel as if she were dying. She saw the bright sun and realized that there were hundreds of lovely, transparent creatures hovering over her. Looking right through them, she could see the white sails of the ship and rosy clouds up in the sky. Their voices were melodious, but so ethereal that human ears could not hear them, just as mortal eyes could not behold them. They soared through the air on their own likeness, with no need for wings. The little mermaid realized that she had a body like theirs and that she was rising higher and higher out of the foam. "Where am I?" she asked, and her voice sounded like that of the others, more ethereal than any earthly music. "Among the daughters of the air," they replied. "Mermaids do not have an immortal soul, and they can never have one without gaining the love of a human being. Eternal life depends on a power outside them. The daughters of the air do not have immortal souls either, but through good deeds they can earn one for themselves. We can fly to the hot countries where sultry, pestilential air takes people's lives. We bring cool breezes. We carry the fragrance of flowers through the air and send relief and healing. Once we have struggled to do all the good we can in 300 years, immortal souls are bestowed on us, and we enjoy the eternal happiness humans find. You, my dear little mermaid, have struggled with all your heart to do what we do. You have suffered and endured, and now you have been transported to the world of the spirits of the air. Through good deeds, you too can earn an immortal soul in 300 years. The little mermaid lifted her transparent arms towards God's sun, and for the first time she could feel tears coming to her eyes. Over by the ship there were sounds of life, with people bustling about. The mermaid could tell that the prince and his beautiful bride were searching for her. With deep sorrow, they were staring out at the pearl-colored foam, as if they knew that she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, the mermaid kissed the bride's forehead, smiled at the prince, and then, with the other children of the air, rose up into the pink clouds that were sailing across the skies. In 300 years we will soar like this into the heavenly kingdom, and we may arrive there even sooner, one of her companions whispered. Invisible to human eyes, we float into homes where there are children. For every day we find a good child who makes his parents happy and deserves their love. God shortens our time of trial. Children never know when we are going to fly into the rooms, and if we smile with joy when we see the child, then a year is taken away from the 300. Then a mean or naughty child makes us shed tears of sorrow, and each of those tears adds another day to our time.